Hi, how is everyone doing? I think we're live. Yes, we are live. Okay, cool. Yo, what a way to start a talk. So thanks everyone for joining. It has been a while since we've had one of these. The last one we had was around kind of applying for your first design job and so forth, which was a panel discussion. I think this is the first talk this year where we have a specific single speaker, and yeah, like I think actually Gideon is a like a really great example to actually start the year off with in terms of single speaker. I actually did a talk for Front End Development South Africa on kind of mental health and so forth. So it's only fitting that we do one for Zapped as well. Let the design community get a bit of love when it comes to kind of mental health and taking care of yourself and so forth as well. But cool, yeah. So let me just dive straight into it. I think I have load shedding at 8 p.m., so don't want to waste any time. This is the reality that we live in. So yeah, first and foremost, thanks for coming to Zapped event. Ooh, and I see. Give me a second. I think this background is super professional. How do I change? Okay, so now it says Zapped. Can I change the background? Sorry, guys. I'm not usually the one in charge of these things. Let's go this one over here. Hey! Oh, that's a bit intense. Okay, let's just go with the black. All right. You guys can just pretend like the last 2 minutes didn't happen. Like I'm trying to just get my bearings. My daughter has severe like tonsillitis, so this week has just been absolute madness. Okay, back to square one. Let's start again. So Zapped. So if this is the first Zapped event that you're actually joining, so effectively what Zapped is Zapped is kind of a community of product designers in South Africa. So therefore the ZAPD, so South African Product Design. Like kind of looking to create a bit of community, share some things, share some experience that we've had, some sharing some skills and tools and so forth. And we are looking to do these talks once a month. We're also this year looking to do a lot more like in-person workshop events and so forth. And so there's a couple of the core team lurking in the text chat, I think. So I think I saw Liesel there. Not sure if Yuasha is here. Justin might also be lurking around. But effectively, so yeah, we're trying to do these events as a means for people to connect within the product design space in South Africa and to kind of share amongst people experiences and skills and so forth. So yeah, if you want to learn more, go to zipd.co.za. We also have a Slack workspace where you can actually learn more. And so just also a quick shout out to the sponsors. So the primary driver behind ZIPD is IO Digital, which is the company that Liesel works for. They have been the primary sponsor now for a very long time. Definitely give them a Google, check them out, and support them. And then also NML, whom Justin works for. And then we have a couple of other people also sponsoring like Code Capsules and so forth. So shout out to all of them. They kind of make these events possible, allowing us to pay the bills and so forth. And so yeah, like let's dive straight into it. So Gideon, I actually know Gideon like before, I think. So we talk about the same type of stuff quite a bit. So we spend a lot of time talking about kind of the world of mental health and all the things associated with that, and like mental health in the context of the tech industry and vulnerability and so forth. But like I kind of knew Gideon even before that, and so it's always like really interesting for me, kind of having these type of discussions with him. I'm going to start this right off the bat, making him super uncomfortable, saying that like I really find it inspiring, just like how vulnerable and open he is about these things. And I think for me, it pushes me as well to be much more transparent and so forth on this. So first and foremost, thanks for that, Gideon. I have seen this actual talk that he's about to give now before, and it's a phenomenal talk. No pressure at all. But that's also the reason why I want to just kind of dive straight into it, because I find that a lot of the value really happens in the Q&A afterwards. So yeah, so Gideon, I'll actually let you just do an introduction of yourself, what you do as a day job, and also why did you decide on this topic? So as I mentioned, this is the second time you're doing this talk. Like, why is this something that's worth talking about, and why did you decide, but like amongst all the other things you could be talking about in the product design space, like Figma or prototyping or any of that stuff, why imposter syndrome? Yeah, so I'm happy to kind of hand it over to you there. I just quickly want to check, do you have slides that you want to share?
Yes, I do. So I'll present, I guess, from my side.
Yes. Yeah, see if that button does anything. Let's just see if we can get that working before we dive into it, so that we don't need to fiddle with that. While Gideon's trying to set that up, I just want to tell you guys as well, please, if you have questions, put them in the text chat. Like Gideon said, like he'll stop every now and then, check if there are any questions. I'll just ask the questions on your behalf, and he can respond to them. This type of thing, there is usually a ton of questions. You look very concerned. Are you getting it working?
Yeah, it's just a question of like when I play the keynote, it kind of takes over the entire screen so that I can't do
that's all right.
Press the present button, but that's fine.
That's all right.
Try and do it anyways.
Yeah, I'm gonna hide my face any second now, so yeah, you can just look at your slides.
Okay, oh boy. Okay, Google Chrome app would like to record this computer screen and audio. Yeah. Okay. Sure.
What could go wrong?
Okay, select a tab to no, but I don't want to share a tab. It's like on my desktop. Okay, wait, entire screen. That's what I am looking for. Okay. Do you see like a blank desktop screen now? That's being shared
on my side. No.
Okay.
So did you press? Oh, guys, this is fun. Like debugging live. Did you press the present button with the big plus?
Yes, I did. Now it's saying Chrome has lost permission to capture your screen. To fix it, go to the system preferences.
Unlock the Are you using a Mac?
Yes.
I wanted to make a joke, but then I remembered I'm in the design space now, so maybe Mac jokes aren't as well received as the developer talks.
Okay, I'm gonna have to quit and reopen Chrome. So
that's
if
right.
You hang on
I will keep the people entertained. No pressure. Cool. Okay, so Gideon will be back.
A few seconds.
Yeah, so Gideon will be back with us in a second. Yeah, maybe this is a good opportunity for you guys to, if you have any questions that you maybe want him to respond to before he actually dives into his talk. This might be an opportunity to write them in the text chat. Also, if you have any questions about like Zapped or kind of the stuff that we do, or where you can find a recording of this afterwards and so forth. Also, leave any questions in the text chat. And the man seems to be back.
Okay, let's give this another try.
All right. Hey, there we go.
Okay, now I can see that you are seeing a blank screen. Okay, that's cool.
Okay, cool.
Then let's just see if I can pull this particular tab out.
Now it's going to do the infinite screen. That's
fantastic.
Okay, what a way to start a talk on imposter syndrome. Obviously, we are all like super massive professionals here. Don't feel like imposters at all. Like we've kind of nailed this. Everything's polished. We don't make anything up as we go, very clearly.
Okay. Sorry, just see. Window. Sorry, I am nearly there, I think.
This is also the part where I maybe say that this was planned. Puts the people
Okay.
at ease. Makes us seem more human.
Okay. Do you see the first slide now?
There we go.
Okay,
And
cool.
I'm happy for you to jump straight into this, not waste any more time. But yeah, like maybe just do a super quick intro of who you are and how you fit into the tech space beyond being just an imposter, because it's not a full-time job, I assume. Cool, but over to you, Gideon.
Cool, thanks, man. Yeah, so I mean, just I don't really like, self-promoting. I'm basically like a sort of a Swiss Army knife designer, product design, UX research. Currently working for a consultancy called Spot On. I am a self-taught gaslighter and design imposter. I've got a degree in multimedia with computer science, and I've mostly been working in fintech and insurtech for the better part of a decade, and currently working with some international clients in Ireland. Why did I decide to do a talk on imposter syndrome? I think for a lot of reasons. I think it's a lot more prevalent than we're aware. I think when I started realizing there was such a thing as imposter syndrome, initially I kind of thought, me being me and not always the most self-confident person, it's probably, just something I struggle with. And then I started reading up a little bit, some blog posts and articles, and I've, kind of came to realize, okay, so it's not entirely just me. There are some people out there. And I think especially after I did this talk at the UX conference last year, I was pretty blown away actually by the amount of people that at least ask questions around it. So yeah, I think my aim with this talk is, it's not necessarily so much to give advice as much as it is about sharing my story, and I think opening up the space for other people to say, hey, I'm struggling with this or something similar, and giving them a platform where they can also talk about their issues. Because in the professional world, I think we often tend to shy away from having these conversations for fear of looking kind of embarrassed or inadequate in one way or another. But I think imposter syndrome also has a, I don't know, special place is not the right word, but plays quite an important role in, especially I think in a design capacity. But I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Is there anything else I needed to cover before getting into it, Skulk? Hello?
I don't think so, unless there is anything you specifically want to cover. But yeah, I'm happy to, you can just chug along, and then if there are any questions in the text chat, I'll just like start screaming, Gideon, 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 and we can then like address the actual question. But yeah, otherwise,
okay.
I'm willing to let you loose.
Cool, man. Thanks.
Cool.
All right. So maybe to start off, I want to ask, have you ever felt any of these bullet points you see up there? Have you felt like you're not good enough, that, you strive for perfection and you never, or very seldom maybe, reach it? You feel very scared of making mistakes, how you might be perceived, or maybe talked down to, or perhaps you're actually pretty good at what you do, and or you've gotten a promotion, and for some reason it just doesn't feel like you've earned it. Maybe your inner voice is telling you that maybe you just got lucky, or beginner's luck, or something like that, or maybe you dreading design feedback, for example, because of a fear of rejection, or you seek validation from others, their opinions, to kind of drive your happiness at work and how you view your work. if you can tick any of these or identify with any of these, I'd like to welcome you to the Imposter Syndrome Club. I think there's many more of us than what we really are aware of. And yeah, let's crack on. So, you know, imposter syndrome, can I eat it? Maybe most of you might be familiar with the concept of imposter syndrome or not, I don't know. But for those who haven't, it kind of, I thought it was something that maybe cropped up mostly in the tech world, and it's sort of a newer phenomenon. But when I researched it a little bit, it turned out that it was already sort of coined in the 1970s. There's two therapists, Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes, and they did a study among women, and these women were very, very smart and very capable. But for some reason, they had doubted that they'd earned their success. And they were worried that they couldn't accomplish things that others expected of them, and that they would soon be found or unmasked for being, inadequate. So interestingly, also something that you find in the literature quite a lot is that imposter syndrome seems to be more prevalent among women and minority groups. So that brings me kind of to the next point, is why I think imposter syndrome is important. It's like, why even do another talk about this? Because there's definitely lots of other talks about this in different industries, articles that you can read, and so forth. But I think the mechanisms behind it aren't always well understood, and that these what's essentially self-negative talk in our minds leads to sort of us gaslighting ourselves, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, and feeling like an imposter in a designer's world. And so I think from a design perspective, and you know, our disciplines, there's a lot to learn from. So if we look at this, which is a very well-known diagram about the disciplines of user experience, if you just sort of very quickly glance at it, at some of the outer line circles, you'll see things like architecture, industrial design, computer science, marketing, there's sociology, psychology. What I'm getting at, there's a lot of different disciplines that make up user experience design. And many of these actually have, I want to almost call it like standalone degrees, which you can go and study. So you can get a degree in computer science or architecture or industrial design or psychology, for example. And yet, I don't think, for the most part, at least in a South African context, you really find many sort of well-crafted, let's call it design or UX degrees and courses. And I think what happens is when you doubt yourself in your job and you're not sure whether you're sort of heading in the right direction, there's not necessarily always a textbook to fall back on and kind of look things up. Design is often not so much about following particular steps or, you know, like a recipe, like, you know, one equals or 1 + 1 = 2. Design is very different kind of discipline in and of itself. I think the other thing that plays into design and what can sometimes cause these feelings of all these thoughts of self-negative talks, also, we as designers often act sort of as the glue between different parts of a business. And what I mean from that is that, you know, when I was, I'll get to that as well. I was a developer before being a designer. And when I was a developer, what was a little bit easier perhaps for me was managing people's expectations. I maybe wore 1 or 2 hats at most. But as a designer, I'm not just communicating perhaps with my Scrum Master or perhaps my dev lead or something like that. I am working with developers. I'm working with product owners, project managers, business analysts, C-level stakeholders, and I have to wear all these different hats. And if I'm too harsh on myself and the feedback that I get from them, that can definitely also wreak havoc on my mental health. I think the other thing is also, yeah, these different business units, again, they often have different measures of what is the correct, in sort of air quotes, outcome. The business overall might have certain sort of metrics or KPIs, whereas the sort of design team that you work in might have different KPIs. The product owner has a different set of expectations about what constitutes success, and trying to kind of appease everyone becomes a very hard, if not impossible, task. And finally, yeah, this is important because all these factors play a role in our mental health. So I've got a quote here, and this is based on a book that I read when I was preparing for this talk. The book's called The Imposter Syndrome Workbook by Athena Danilo. She says, thoughts sometimes present an accurate idea of who we are and what we value, but they can sometimes deceive us. She says, feeling like an imposter means believing that you're not as competent as others believe you to be. And a lot of these ideas, she says, often begin even before we begin our career. There's many studies that have been done. There's one in particular that was done in 2014 by Lee Hughes and I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's spelled THU. And it was a study done on American undergraduate and graduate students. And the study found that there's a deep connection between the parenting styles and those that exhibited or expressed notions of imposter syndrome. So a lot of these things often even form as early as our childhood, not just necessarily during our careers. I can certainly look back at myself and reflect on my childhood, and I can see clearly there's a path there already from how sort of my, feelings of self-worth already started out as. So I said I would kind of use myself as a case study to kind of just, I think, create awareness and sort of a little bit as a talking point for all things imposter syndrome. So the first part of two stories I have is in my childhood, and that happened when I was in high school. So when I was in high school, I had practiced athletics and cross country about 4 or 5 days a week. And what would happen is, like, after practice, I would get home and ideally I would have done my homework, but I was usually so knackered, just so tired, that I just couldn't concentrate and get any work done. So I would typically take like an hour and a half nap. So later on, much later in my life, in my 30s, I would kind of discover that I have some autoimmune conditions, which is why I often experience fatigue, but that's kind of a talk for another day. But my mom, kind of observing me through my high school years, when I was around grade 11 or 12, and I kind of had to decide what I wanted to go study. My mom's was a lecturer for pretty much her whole career at the university. She's got 2 PhDs. My dad's like, he's also retired, but he's also got a PhD in chemistry. So without necessarily, I think, my parents imposing any, particular expectations on what I should do after school, my mom, I think when I was grade 11 or 12, she said that I shouldn't sort of feel pressure to go to the university and get a degree. I can, go and do whatever I like. And somehow in my mind, I think that translated to, like, my mom kind of, doesn't have necessarily faith in my ability and probably thinks I'm lazy, because she was often asking why I sleep so much. And I kind of decided that I would, prove her wrong. But the bottom line is that message would kind of stick with me for many, many years to come. So, you know, if you keep on listening to these thoughts, you start to, what I would call, you know, kind of gaslight yourself. So I achieved many years later level 99 imposter syndrome achievement unlocked check. I had low self-esteem check, and so the gaslighting sort of continued. So, you know, for those who wonder what gaslighting means, I only, you know, probably learned about it 4 or 5 years ago. So gaslighting is a technique that undermines a person's perception of reality. When someone's gaslighting you, you may second guess yourself, your memories, recent events, and perceptions. And that is something I had done to myself quite a lot as my condition sort of progressed and got worse. And so the next phase of my life where I was gaslighting myself was through a series of events where I started questioning whether I was any good at design. Because when I had started out as a designer slightly more than a decade ago, every job I ever had, I was mostly the lone ranger or designer. From a UX standpoint, there was often like a UI designer as well, but I didn't really have a mentor or anyone else I could really sort of bounce things off of, etc. And
can I quickly interrupt you there?
Yeah, sure.
So that's like, oh man, I was trying to wait for a gap, but I think like you actually just like touched on a specific question that was asked. So like I actually want to dive into that. So Peter, I assume, I mean like it's a toss up between Peter and Peter. Like, you know, like that's the reality of living in South Africa. I assume Peter. So he asked whether you also find that a lack of mentorship from senior designers kind of fuel the fire of imposter syndrome, and like, which is why I kind of just jumped in now, because like it's so tied to what you just touched on now.
Absolutely.
So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, 100%. Sure. If I was much later, I was lucky enough or fortunate enough to then work at my previous job, and especially also my current job, where there were a lot of like really, really seasoned, very talented people. And they, you know, the previous job didn't even have a mentorship program, but they kind of just took me under their wings. And I was in a very broken place, I think, in a lot of ways, but they'd built me up so much. To this day, those are people that I still have contact with. I know I can bounce ideas off of them and not feel like they're going to ask, why did I, you know, paint this turd golden? Yeah, I can't like overstate the role that a mentor of sorts plays in your life. I mean, I've since also gone and got some sort of almost like business/life coaching that's also helped a lot. You know, yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but definitely it makes a massive difference.
Yeah, I can attest to that as well. I don't think necessarily I suffered that much from imposter syndrome, but I definitely have my own history of mental health and mental illness and so forth. And I definitely had that feeling of when I kind of entered the tech industry, of like being lost and then just like literally not, almost like you're stumbling in a dark room. And I think something that I think is taken for granted by a lot of people today is, back in that day there wasn't really, well, there was YouTube, but you know, there wasn't really Fiverr, or wasn't really like a Udemy. I think lynda.com just came out, but it was like, back then it was like super expensive. So there wasn't like a medium.com or any of that. There was like no real public discussion on a lot of these things. So unless you were in the circles where these discussions were happening, you always felt kind of like, you know, like an outsider. And I'm curious to what degree that dynamic plays a role and played a role, compared to a lot of people who are getting into design right now, where you can just go on YouTube and you can search for what are the core competencies of a product designer, whatever.
Yeah.
Not saying that like that's gonna make you feel less more at ease. It might do the opposite, where you might feel like, oh shit, I'm nowhere near that. But at the very least, like, it's almost like I feel when we were entering, because we're kind of like entered the industry around the same time, is it's like you almost didn't have that soundboard in terms of like, am I even like going in the right direction? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I want to almost backtrack even just slightly further. So, I mean, I guess I didn't say it explicitly on the slides, but I do struggle with anxiety and depression. Seems to be something that runs in the family. You and I have talked about this a lot. And,
extensively, which is why I'm smiling. Yeah. Like, I know,
so that if you take that as I'm going to say almost like a pouring fuel on the fire or a catalyst, that already made myself just not a very confident person in general. And when you're an anxious kind of person or have feelings of anxiety, what creates more anxiety, amongst other things, is when there's uncertainty. And when you're busy designing, unlike where, if I do other activities, like maybe coding to some degree, at least at the very, very, very least, I can figure out, if it's about like, okay, the compiler, might not be giving me errors. And maybe it's like, if I'm building something to spec, it's like puzzle pieces, and I can kind of feel the sense of progress as I'm doing this, right? I can kind of measure it to that. So that's one part. It's about, to do with the anxiety of uncertainty. And then the other part, which is sort of tied to that, was like exactly what you said. When we started out, when I got interested in UX, which was, I think, around 2010, 11-ish, that's when it was like the heyday for Smashing Magazine and A List Apart. And there might have been UX Matters or one of those websites, but not even close to the kind of information available out there.
I have an entire bookcase of Smashing Magazine books here behind me, so no, I hear you. Yeah,
right. I mean, among them might well be Luke Wroblewski's How to Design Forms, those sorts of things. Like that was like solid gold at the time.
But also, anyway, like, I also want to quickly interject there. Like, those people were like working for Google and Yahoo, and so like the discussions you were exposed to are not like these kind of discussions. They were like, so I don't know how much that actually helped with imposter syndrome. I do think, like, for example, there's a lot of crap on medium.com, like so much trash on there in terms of just opinions and stuff like that are nonsensical. But I do think at the very least, there's some discussion happening of people that might be our peers. Whereas, as you very much like, Luke Wroblewski, I never know how to pronounce his surname. Luke W.
Yeah,
Wroblewski. So Luke W. So he effectively coined the term mobile first. So like, he's literally the guy. Like, and so this is kind of the type of people that you kind of saw, that you measured yourself against. So, but like, I think we're getting a bit off track here, but I sometimes think about that. It's such an interesting kind of like, like just difference in terms of nowadays.
Absolutely. Even I think even from a development, well, I think it's what you're saying, standpoint as well, right? There wasn't nearly the amount of resources out there today, and some things were just plain harder to do, I think, also. But that's a talk for another time.
Cool. But yeah, I'll let you get back into it. So cue slides. Here we go.
Cue slides.
Yeah.
Okay, so sorry, I just want to jump back. Just want to see, I think I missed the second part of my story here. Yeah, sorry. So
I also want to say I appreciate I'm getting the version 2.0 here. I don't think this is the one you presented previously, right?
No, it is pretty much. I mean, I might have changed like one or two things, but not that much. Okay. So
maybe I'm just paying more attention. Okay. Cheers.
No worries, man. Yeah, so I just want to go back to my initial story that I told when I was in high school, and I was kind of like feeling like my parents were like there was this sort of invisible bar benchmark set, and I felt like I needed to kind of live up to that, and then going through phase or doing this pivot from dev to design and trying to find my way through this and just feeling like I'm spinning my wheels. And so, now it's years and years of these thoughts that are slowly sort of eating away at at you as a person. And so what would happen eventually is that after a number of jobs, around 2017, I landed a job with a big bank, and they were on a hiring spree, hiring very talented people left, right, and center. Many of these people, not just talented, but they'd also studied some form of design, whether it was maybe at Vega or AAA, or I don't know, information design, or something like that. And so their experience was very different to mine, who sort of came more from a dev background. And I really, I think, envied the kind of work that they did, and measured myself incredibly against them. And I would try and learn as much as I could through sort of observation and asking questions. But for the most part, I think I was just sort of silently criticizing myself as to why I wasn't at their level, which is, where the sort of gaslighting part comes in, and how that got worse. So as time went on, I kind of relied a lot, or very heavily, upon opinions of others to validate myself, because as your self-doubt grows and you sort of don't believe in your ability, you start to just look towards others for kind of the green light. It got so bad. Now, I didn't mention this in the initial talk, but maybe it's worth mentioning, because that also did really have a big influences. At the time where I reached this really big low point, my wife had been diagnosed with like an aggressive brain tumor, and she was going for surgery. And I mean, that's a whole story in and of itself. But I think my brain / body just kind of went into survival mode. And there's a lot of sort of science that shows when you're in survival mode, your brain kind of tends to shut off almost certain pieces of your brain, and it's kind of like almost just your lizard brain for the most part that works or takes over. So yeah, the imposter syndrome just grew worse, and I think I felt at some point like I don't think I have anything to offer necessarily as a designer. I'm looking at all these people who seem to know what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, and I don't feel like I measure up. So I thought, what I should do, I should probably stop, wasting my time, because this is like a ticking time bomb. I will be discovered very soon, any day now, and it'll be found out that I don't really have any design skills whatsoever. And maybe I should just rather move back to being a developer, which, is not a good idea to do. I don't think you should switch or pivot to something if it's out of fear. It's probably not a good reason to do it. But as crazy as it was, that's kind of what my my brain was going towards. And so what I did was I tried to skill myself up during that time. In my spare time, I was obsessed. I would just use all my time trying to learn as much as I could about development again, thinking I should rather pivot before someone catches me out. And that meant that I sacrificed a lot of the time I could have spent with my wife and my son back then. I look back, I think, in regret to that era and think, man, my son was, I think, around 4 or 5 then, and I feel like some of that time are wasted years, and I wish I had done it differently. And to quote the Athena Danilo again from the book, she said, "Have you ever been exhausted to the point of feeling so over being an adult with responsibilities? That, my friend, is called burnout." And for anyone that's ever burnt out or gotten close to burnout, it's not a good place to be. It takes very, very long to really recover from that. I mean, I got so close to burnout as a result that my doctor had to increase my medication just for me to kind of be functional. I lost weight. I developed like gut inflammation, which I think to this day hasn't really even fully healed. And that was a very high price to pay for, kind of going down that path. So I wanted to jump from that and talk a little bit about sources of negative talk, or, colloquially, self-gaslighting. And one of them is when we compare ourselves with others. So there on the right, there's a little Figma game I'd found once where someone had probably in a day built essentially a game in Figma with, some very rudimentary logic. And, here you are perhaps just trying to still figure out how auto layout works. And even I think to this day, sometimes, despite maybe knowing better, I would read a Medium article or some blog post and think, damn, why didn't I think of that? Or geez, this person seems to know a lot. I'm falling behind in the industry. I really need to catch up. Another thing that happens is, or that feeds into self-negative talk, is when we try and figure out what to do with the feedback that we get at work. Now, I think in a design team, hopefully most of the time the feedback that you get is a little bit more constructive and sort of accurate and helps you, become better. But what also happens is the CEO or some C-level exec is looking at you presenting, and they're looking at your designs, and they might say something like, we've been looking at our competitors and most of them have a bright yellow CTA with white text, and on the inside you're screaming, but that is no contrast. What about accessibility? So I think, again, if you're looking for validation and you try and contextualize work feedback, it might not turn out very well. And then there's also, I've definitely experienced this also, feelings of not belonging. And there could be lots and lots of reasons for that. But I mean, just as a sort of little piece of research that I looked up, they found that researchers saw that people who reported feelings of loneliness tend to get fewer promotions, they switch jobs more often, they're more likely to quit their current job in the next 6 months, and they tend to perform worse. And I think fundamentally, we as human beings are probably, evolutionary. We're still sort of pack animals. We need to belong to something, whatever that might look like. We need a sense of belonging. And I think sometimes that can be very challenging, especially if perhaps you're, like the Lone Ranger designer at a company where people might not quite understand, or see design through your lens. It can be hard because you can't necessarily always bounce off ideas, or you need to champion sort of design and be an advocate for it. But, if you're in a room full of very strong, opinionated people, it might be very hard, kind of trying to bring your voice forward and making compelling sort of arguments. Another thing that's also, and this might seem a bit odd, but feed into this, is something called like a highly sensitive person. I probably fall quite a bit into that category. They say, from what I've read, they say 1 out of 5 people have inherited a special set of genes that leads to having highly attuned central nervous system, which is why I put Xavier up there. It's almost like, you've got special abilities, because they say you are likely someone who thinks, feels, and experiences the world more deeply. You're highly attuned to subtleties in your environment as well as others' emotions. They say that people with HSPs have, interestingly, more active mirror neurons, which is what helps you empathize and understand other people's behavior. You might find that you sense other people's moods even maybe before they say something. And sometimes it's almost as you even take on their emotions as your own. I can definitely identify with that. If there's like a super awkward situation, someone is in a really foul maybe mood or something, and there's tension, I can feel it, and often, it feels a bit like I wish I had a shovel and I could just dig myself a hole and just kind of stay there for the rest of the meeting. And then something else that also can sort of cause feelings of probably, not belonging is neurodiversity. So when I talk about neurodiversity, it's like we have so many different makeups when it comes to our brains. This is across a spectrum of many, many things. It could be like, ADHD, it could be a form of autism, or it could be that you're a highly sensitive person. They say that, or there's a guy here from Ernst Young Global, Kieran Chukla, and he says that neurodivergent people make up about 20% of the population, but face around an unemployment rate of around 85%. Greta Thunberg, interestingly, which I didn't know, is also kind of sees herself as being on the spectrum, and she's quoted as saying her activism has been successful because of, rather than despite, her autistic social cognitive style. Look at what the impact that she's having. And these sort of neurodiverse people are often not understood by society or the workplace. And I think that also can open a gap for, feelings of sort of not belonging or loneliness, or feeling just very different and out of place. The other one that I think also feeds into self-negative talk is when there's very little or no feedback loops, which I kind of touched on a little bit earlier. Is design, again, is a team sport. It's not, preferably not a designer just kind of sitting in the corner all by themselves, and they're creating designs and sort of just chucking them over the wall to the developer. Design needs like proper feedback loops to kind of move forward, to gauge whether you're moving in the right direction, whether it is through user research, it could be user testing. But the reality also is sometimes, for various reasons, those feedback loops don't exist. And I think if you're already prone to, strong opinions, this can also kind of fuel self-doubt. So in the book about Imposter Syndrome, the author talks about 5 what she calls archetypes that feed into Imposter Syndrome. my friend joked. She said that she thinks she ticks all the 5 types, but she said, I can't say I identify with all of them because I wouldn't feel qualified to answer, which is kind of like an imposter syndrome joke. So the first one is the perfectionist.
Sorry, Gideon, can I maybe interrupt you quickly before that? So there's some couple of fresh questions just before you dive into that list.
Sure thing.
So there's a really great one from Monique that I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on, which effectively asks, at which point did you feel a tipping point regarding doubting yourself? Asking like probably as you transitioned into senior level, but don't think it's part of the fun of the journey either way, highs and lows. So let's start with the first part. Was there a point where you kind of felt, hey, I'm no longer that much of an imposter?
I think I probably started feeling that for the first time, let's see, probably around 2019, maybe 2020. So not that long ago. And I mean, by I don't know, to role or title or whatever, I was technically a senior. But man, I did not feel like that at all. And again, the thing that really built me up was being surrounded by like, it was a much smaller team than I worked with at the bank. I mean, we were like 4 or 5 people, but those people were very, very supportive of me. And I sort of took on when there was an opportunity to kind of try and learn something new, I, at the very least, tried my hand at it. And yeah, they encouraged me a lot along the way. There's a lot of things that also, I think, again, changed my view about myself. And again, something like therapy also, which, we can talk about more later, something that also plays a big role. What I will say is the thoughts of, in my case specifically, and it'll be different for different people. In my case, I think the thoughts of not reaching a self-imposed standard and feelings of, I guess, failure in a sense, never truly go away. It's rather that I've come to be better at living with them and not letting them maybe paralyze me. Yeah, I don't know if that answers any of it, but
no, that's phenomenal. And I think there's also, like with all these things, there's kind of like general temperamental things that are kind of just part of the human condition, and then like they are kind of pathological versions of these, which are just like where it's out of control. And like I actually think that you can struggle with a lot of these things even without like having something as severe as imposter syndrome. And I actually think there's a lot of literature out there that helps one deal with, like, I would say the whole lean methodology is built upon this idea that the things we do to protect ourselves from criticism actually leads to worse design decisions. And I think for me that was a big turning point. For me also, I think for myself, I often tell my students as well, it's not necessarily that the imposter syndrome goes away or your sense of that you don't know what you're doing goes away, is that you eventually just figure out how little everyone else actually knows. And without, like, a large majority of them like tell me eventually, like when they start working in the field, now I know what you mean. Because like they some of them eventually work at big companies and whatever, and they just realize like this the team lead like has no idea what he's doing. Like he's just making it up as he goes or whatever. And I think that's a big part of the discussion is that I think we overestimate how much everyone else knows and how much everyone else has ready-made answers for things. I think a big part of this is always references is the when WhatsApp and Facebook went down, where people were like, yeah, it's a cyber attack and whatever. Like people couldn't believe that a company as big as Facebook could just like botch their DNS so badly. They couldn't believe someone who works at Facebook could just make a mistake that is so critical and brings everything down without it being like some hacker or something. And like the reality is, I think once you get a bit of an insight into this and you start working at some of these companies, you realize like, man, like it's very scary realizing just like how little we know about the things we build and design and like how little understanding we actually have of anything we're doing, whether it's kind of how to design a product or whatever. Yeah, no, 100%. There's also a really great question, or not a question, but maybe just a comment from Laureen, who's actually also one of my previous students as well. So hi, Laureen. Good to have you here. Where she mentions, that as a new mom, she struggles with kind of upskilling herself and kind of the guilt around that. And I can also very much relate to that. I have a 1-year-old daughter, right now, and like I have another one on the way. So. And at the moment, I'm working on Sundays, not Sundays. Just my wife would kill me. Saturdays, half day, just like because times are tough, and there's a lot that needs to be done, and a lot of stuff. Specifically, those of us that only started kind of our career journeys a bit later in our lives. So I spent a lot of my life just trying to bring my own mental health stuff under control. So it's a lot of backfilling that needs to happen in terms of mortgages and those type of things. So I 100% feel this, and I sometimes don't even know how to balance this. I'm curious whether you can speak to this, Gideon. Given that like you're here now and you're kind of like engaging with the community and like doing this talk where you could have like spent time with the family and so forth. How do you kind of make those decisions? And
So I guess in a way, if I have to paraphrase, it's kind of like, are you asking when do I?
No, I'm just curious.
Let go of the notion of.
Yeah, I'm just curious what your thoughts are around the topic. And you did mention like that part where you had that point in your life where you felt like kind of you sacrificed a lot of family time and so forth. So I'm curious whether you've just decided, no, family comes first, even if it means at the detriment of my job or upskilling or whatever, or is it a bit more nuanced?
Yeah, I think, essentially, okay, in my case, and if it's specifically looking back at that, it was, it was driven by intense fear. The fear that, it was a bunch of things put together, because it's like when you think you're not competent, like to that level at least, then you also start, I think, you start feeling or developing senses of not belonging, because you put these people up on a pedestal and you're down here. And like you said, the reality is, you've got bills to pay, mortgages, children, all those things. And if you think you're going to be discovered and maybe that's going to all fall away and be taken from you, you will, you're going into survival mode. And you will do anything and everything in your power to try and mitigate that. That's an extreme example. Hopefully no one of you ever have been or ever get to that point. But it's also rooted in a lot of if you reflect back on it, on irrational sort of things as well. Like my job was in no danger of disappearing. I'd never gotten bad, like, when it came to performance reviews, I'd never gotten bad performance reviews or anything. If anything, I got really good performance reviews from my peers, but that wasn't good enough for me, because I was like, I'm good at this and this and that, or decent or whatever at that, but I'm not good yet at that thing that I know this person or those people can do. And I should be able to do that as well. And therefore I'm not deserving of whatever. And I really, it's beginner's luck. I shouldn't be here.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal answer. No, that's a phenomenal answer. Like, and I think, like, looking back at my own journey as well, like I definitely can relate to that a lot. Like, I think the danger there is when it's hard for you to make a rational decision about it. Like, as you mentioned, when like you like literally perceive it at the same level of my house might burn down, or someone might break in and kidnap me or whatever. Like there's almost that. You spoke about the lizard brain. There's almost like that, and I think that is problematic. Whereas it's different if you're like, okay, listen, like I'm in a specific situation, and or family's in a specific situation because of kind of the way my life played out. Like, I have student debts and whatever. And let's figure out, like, okay, cool. What are some sacrifices that are reasonable? But I do hear you that there's a point where it's literally like you don't have that discussion. It's almost like this almost like panic, and you're just like, I need to do something. I need to do something.
Because the sooner I can pivot to whatever else, in that case, the sooner I can escape my potential disastrous future.
100%. So there's another great question here about I've recently entered into an internship role at a small company, and after seeing some of the code I'll be working on, I honestly feel like I've bitten off more than I can chew. That's a great question. What would your response be to that?
So because I also started out as a developer, I kind of understand a bit about that. I remember, it's probably a swear word, but I used to be a .NET developer, and cue the laughs. And I remember starting at a little company. I was still living in Pretoria, and the people were just throwing around acronyms when I started. It was like, I remember the one thing was the GAC, the Global Assembly Cache, stuff like that, and I had no idea what it was. And it was like, it kept coming. And I also just thought, oh dear, what have I got myself into? Because let's face it, the reality, I think, of specifically development as well, is like, there is a lot to learn, especially nowadays, right? I would say, a decade ago, it was already tough, but, maybe within some reason. I think now there's a lot more that's going on. I mean, you can attest to the front end. When I was still a developer, there was the base framework that existed for interactivity was, apart from Flash, was jQuery. There wasn't Angular. There was no React. There was no TypeScript.
Silverlight.
So I worked in Microsoft Silverlight, which is basically their version of Flash. So I think as a junior, you need to really, really take it easy on yourself, and not expect that you will learn everything and know everything within a year. And again, I think this is exactly where I think a mentorship or coaching or whatever plays a role. If you kind of like, and maybe this, that person's asking the question, I don't know if you work remote. But if you work remote, I imagine that's worse. Because I often think to myself, like, if I had to work as a junior developer now, where you need a lot more sort of guidance and you need to ask a lot of questions. I don't know if Slack or whatever, cuts it. Like, I don't know how that even works. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I can maybe speak to that as well, because I'm on the other side, like where I'm the one hiring, like onboarding interns and so forth. And what I often find is that I think you be careful also that you think they expect it. Like I do whenever I'm bringing someone on board, like specific it's a junior, I think I expect them to like not know what they're doing. I expect it to be an investment, specifically if it's an internship. To me, an internship, honestly, and this is why a lot of places don't do internships, because an internship to me is always a negative return on investment. If I take on an intern, I realize that I'm gonna have to invest more in you than I'm gonna get back, just because of the nature. So to me, bringing someone on board as an intern is a long-term investment. I'd willing to pay that upfront cost with the hope that eventually you'll kind of level up and you'll be able to provide value. And because we have that relationship, you'll maybe have a bit of loyalty and not be like, cheers guys, I got another job, see you later. So yeah, like specifically if you're saying it's an internship, I would maybe have a discussion with someone, maybe like even if it's just your peers at the job, like mention this. Like I can promise you, you are not the first person to have this type of discussion. What I can tell you is that if you hide it and if you try and compensate for it, like that is not a good approach. Because even if it's not true, even if you are actually really good and you just think you're not that great, even then, like you're gonna act in ways and you're gonna be scared to ask for feedback and so forth. That's detrimental. So I would maybe see how that can be addressed. I don't think it's a good place to be in, and then like kind of a good way to feel. So yeah, maybe have some private discussions with people. Maybe even if it's not direct superiors, maybe if there are other interns, maybe if there are other juniors, maybe chat with them and do a sanity check. Say, hey, listen, this is how I'm feeling. Am I in over my head? Like, have you kind of struggled with this thing? Who did you speak to? And so forth. But like honestly, to me, honesty is always the best approach here, specifically if you're an intern. If you were hired to be a senior or a product lead and you're like, I have no idea how to even open Figma or whatever, like that's a different question. But, given that there's a match between what you're feeling and kind of what I would expect an internship role to be, like maybe just be a bit open about it. Like I would expect an intern to feel that way. Yeah. So that's maybe my take on it. Also, like probably like the most important question tonight. So, hey, I see Mike is lurking in the text chat, and he asked Gideon, how do you manage to be so ridiculously good looking all the time? Huh? It's that sweet imposter syndrome. It's anti-aging. It's the anti-aging effects of the imposter syndrome. Would highly recommend. Yeah. Cool.
Just for the record, when I think Jax had posted that I was doing this talk, I didn't even post it on my own LinkedIn because I was just like, no, I'll just creep, sort of lurk in the dark, and we'll just get this over with very, very quickly.
Oh, do I have bad news for you? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not good with the spotlights on me. Yeah. But yes, I have gotten a lot of people who I don't know, underestimate my age by maybe 10 years. But yeah. I'm turning 40 this year, just to clear that up.
Yeah. I think we're all in awe of. We just want to know what skin moisturizer you're using, but yeah. Cool.
I don't know. I think it does. Yeah, never mind.
This discussion has gotten way off track. I'll let you get back to the 5 types of imposters.
Okay, don't worry. I'm nearly done. I'm like 8 slides away from being done.
Cool.
So I think a lot of these that are running, that I'm going to run through, are sort of somewhat self-explanatory in the title. So, I mean, the one archetype, the perfectionist, and I definitely identify with this, is where, and this is, you know, potentially maybe where if you're a junior as well, you know, can come into play, where you feel like you have to have done something wrong. Maybe, you know, you commit your code and you push it, and, you know, you get comments back from someone reviewing your code, and they found, you know, you could have written this thing slightly better or whatever, and you like flagellate yourself afterwards for not doing it that way. That definitely leads to feelings of imposter syndrome, and what it also does in effect is if you keep doing that to yourself, you become more and more afraid of, you know, making quote unquote a mistake, or having failures. I think often there's no such thing as failures anyway, really. It's only learning opportunities, but unfortunately our minds doesn't always spin the story like that. The other one she mentions is the genius, and so again, the genius is where we feel like we have to know everything, and what it does is, often if you start, actually again back to kind of if you're maybe like in a junior or internship role, is like there's a lot of stuff to learn. Obviously you're not going to know everything, it's impossible. There's a learning process that needs to happen. Everything's new, and that can sort of, you know, create this fear, which kind of removes the room for growing and learning and developing, whether, you know, it's personally or professionally. There's always a time to learn something new, and if, you know, the genius creeps in, it just limits your ability to do that. And then the other way we sometimes cope with this is the archetype of the Lone Ranger. Maybe I suffer a little bit less from this one. If anything, I'm more than happy to, you know, get other people's opinions on something and you know, ask for help. But yeah, so, some people might feel that, you know, if they ask for any help, you know, it's going to kind of show that they're incompetent, that they don't know what they're doing. I mean, how many times in, whether it's, you know, been a lecture or some talk, you know, I'm guilty of this too at times, you know, where you're afraid to stick up your hand and ask something because you think it's too obvious. You know, people are going to laugh at you and you're going to feel embarrassed. But it just really, you know, robs you of the opportunity to actually ask your question. And so many times there's like 20 other people in the room that are wondering exactly the same thing, and they're also scared to put up their hands. And then the other one, which is kind of similar to the genius, is the expert. The genius is kind of like the generic one who always needs to know everything, whereas the expert is sort of more in like career and school settings. It makes it very difficult to again sort of give yourself credit for the things that you are successful in, things that you've put a lot of hard work in. It makes it hard to answer, or rather to ask questions without feeling bad, as opposed to seeing it as a learning opportunity. And then the last one is the superhero. So I've done this so many times to myself, more than I can count, where we want to please others, to be validated. And so we just say yes to everything. And what happens is we overextend ourselves, and now we have to sit over the weekend or, you know, burn the midnight oil to get something done. And if we don't, you know, get it done, or don't get it done to sort of our level of quality, then we kind of punish ourselves and go through guilt tripping. And then our coping strategies for a lot of these sort of come down to three things. The one I've mentioned, which is overworking. You are just overextending yourself beyond your human ability, and that most likely will lead to burnout eventually. The other thing is avoidance. so many times I have sort of, I think, in the past distanced myself from people, and just socially kind of cut myself off from people because I didn't feel self-confident or worthy, and I couldn't present myself that way to other people because I just didn't feel worthy of their sort of interaction. And then secrecy. So if you're struggling with something, in my case, whether it's anxiety or depression, or if you keep sort of hiding mistakes or shortcomings or limitations, things that you need. Maybe it's that you need some time off for mental health or something like that, and you don't speak up about it. That also limits our ability. And then the last part is just some of the things that have helped me along the way. This is the last slide. Is I think when the pandemic started, I got myself a Headspace subscription. It's like $60 a month. Base $60 a month. I'm still spending. I've really built a habit, like 5 days at least out of the week. I use the Headspace app. And it's a really good app in a lot of ways because it's not just the meditations. There's sort of courses on things like loneliness, anxiety, stress, like so many different things. And the content is being updated very regularly. It's really worth the money, I would say. And I think a lot of the, let's call it kind of like guidelines or principles or the way I approach things now, I've actually kind of learned through the app, sort of because it's about mindfulness, of feelings of sort of acceptance and realizing that I can't fundamentally outrun or control my anxiety. It's something where I need to allow it to come and sort of go. And it's essentially building a different relationship with the feelings of anxiety, and also realizing that these are emotions. Emotions come and go; they're not set in stone. And then the other thing is, it's almost like pushing back a little bit on these self-negative thoughts. Often when I have, a fear of something, especially something that I've done a lot of times before, whether it's fear of failure or whatever the case may be, I have to really call out that thought and say, hang on. Like, I've done this before. Like, this is not the first time. This is not my first rodeo. It's turned out fine every other time. Like, there's no reason to believe that this time it's going to crash and burn. And even if it did, for the sake of the argument, crash and burn, am I going to die? No, probably not, unless I'm flying a plane. But for the most part, the worst outcome that my mind can come up with, like, never happens. And then also, again, being vulnerable with people you trust. Again, I've been, I think, super fortunate but I've also actively seeked those people out. They, didn't necessarily always just fall in my lap, but I've seeked out people, whether it's, someone like Skulk or Jax or Blaze, or, to kind of bounce sort of some of my struggles and thoughts off of them also, and just kind of getting it out there, seeing where I'm at. So that's the mental part that I pay attention to. And then apart from that, I would also say that therapy has played a big role. I think Squawk can, as attested to that many times before as well. If you have a medical plan and you can afford to see a psychologist, it's absolutely worth it. And even if you don't click with the first psychologist, you will eventually find someone that you definitely do click with. That has made a massive impact for me. And then on the physical side, I need good sleep. So when I say good sleep, I mean like minimum 8 hours. Like I envy people who can get by with like 5 hours sleep, and still just crank out the work. But I definitely need 8 hours sleep. It is what it is. And exercise as well. Like I exercise very regularly. There's just so much research out there about the benefits that exercise have, not just getting fit or whatever, but like from a chemical balance for your brain. I can't overstate that. And eating healthy as well. Like especially with my autoimmune conditions, I've had to adjust my diet a lot. I wasn't eating necessarily rubbish before, but like I'm eating super healthy now, like avoiding gluten in my case and things like that, and sort of refined sugars, etc. And that's also making a very big difference for me. And then the refuelers, the things that sort of keep me coming back and bouncing back, are sort of accepting compliments. I think in the past, when people would compliment my work, I would just internally just think like, yeah, that's just beginner's luck, or it's actually really easy. They just don't know it. They see it as something great or whatever, but it's not. And then there are some days when sometimes it's circumstantial, but many times it's just I don't know whether it's chemical imbalance or what, but it's just my mind's not playing along, and I'm just not feeling good those days. I'm not feeling good about myself, and I often look back at like feedback that other people have given me. Like I sort of deliberately keep a set of notes with that feedback, and it's a bit like calling BS again on the gremlins, where it's like, look, these are the facts, or this is what other people say about me. So the fact that my mind is like trying to bring me down, that's just not true if I look at what other people are saying. And then like I said, lastly, the mentorship and coaching are so important. Like, can't overstate that. That can also, I think, just excel you as a person so much faster than you can by yourself. Yeah, that is it. The end of the slides. Let's see.
Cool. And you are just in time, because my power is going off in like 6
5
minutes.
minutes.
5 minutes. So it would have been very, very awkward if the stream just stopped and that was the end of it. Yeah, dude. Like as always, like man, this is like even just like seeing you present a lot of the stuff again. Like man, I don't know, like it's almost like it's so easy to just get distracted and just get so caught in our minds and just what we need to do, that every time I'm given an opportunity to just like center myself again and like kind of think about these things, think about my own insecurities and so forth, it's always like it's super insightful experience. And I'm always like, man, like I have so much respect for just your openness about this. And how I almost want to say matter of a fact you talk about it, and I think that goes a very long way in normalizing a lot of these things, because I think a big problem as well is that we almost think like even imposter syndrome itself is something to be ashamed of, that there's something wrong with you, and there are like cases where you maybe need some intervention or to speak with someone, not to discount that. But I like the idea of what you said about like almost writing out the feelings as well. And it's almost like trying to not feel like an imposter is actually more of a problem than just kind of experiencing that and being like, you know what, like there's a ton of stuff to learn. I don't know everything just yet. I'm not going to try and pretend like I know everything. I also think that if one has been in the industry long enough, you also realize there's just too much Like no one can feasibly master everything, if at all, even a single thing. And I think that's where the nuance comes in, is like also accepting the fact that you know like it's, you don't know everything, and that's okay. And being open about that. Yeah, it's something I had to learn the hard way, and I think for me as well, what really helped me a ton is, I don't know, like I think I maybe very early in my early 20s had a much more, I don't know what would be the word, like I don't want to say antagonistic or competitive, or a much more like dog eat dog mentality to all of this. I very much kind of saw a lot of this as a zero sum game. You know, if this guy is amazing and he's just killing it, then he's going to take a job that I'm not going to be able to get. And I think it also helps a ton just like being more open and being more like also at peace with like kind of being more forgiving of things that other people don't know. And they will also kind of provide you with the same. I found that very, very helpful, specifically in teams as well. But that's also like, you know, that's such a big thing to learn. It's just like that in itself. But yeah, so maybe just in closing, so I just want to ask you two things. First is, there's probably a ton of people that have like lots of questions they would like to ask you. And I just know this, like, and I kind of mention this because I know you don't really worry about people messaging you, asking you questions and so forth. I think if like I wouldn't maybe bring this up if I was like, oh no, now he's just going to be flooded with messages and so forth. But I know you don't mind that much. Where can people maybe get in touch with you? If anything you said kind of resonated with them, where can people maybe reach out to you? Maybe other questions that they didn't want to ask publicly in the text chat, or they maybe aren't able to articulate just now, and maybe tomorrow something clicks and they're like, hey, I'd really like to hear Gideon's thoughts on this. Where can people reach out to you?
I mean, okay, so I'm on ZAPD, so I mean, you can like DM me there.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
maybe actually just sorry.
I mean, there's
put a note
LinkedIn
in the text chat. So there, for anyone who's not on there just yet, I just added it. You can just join on there and just search for Gideon.
Yeah, and if that's a barrier to entry or whatever the case may be, then I mean, I'm obviously on LinkedIn. There should be only one Gideon Carstens. I don't think there's any others. I could be wrong.
I have the same thing going. There's only so many skull painters in take.
You know, in South Africa, yeah. Cape Town. So, you know, you'll definitely find me there. Okay, yeah, I think you once mentioned to me, don't just give out your phone number and email. So
yeah, don't give out your email unless you want like 50 emails about like Viagra pills or whatever. Okay, so yeah, I wouldn't recommend you maybe share your email on this platform, but yeah, I think yeah, LinkedIn is a good one. Zapped, also a great one. Yeah. Even if you don't like, if you're struggling to get in touch with him, maybe just also pop me a message on like Meetup. On the Meetup group or whatever, send a direct message and we'll put you in touch. Mike said he should maybe change his name. Yeah, like there's a lot of Mikes in tech. I can highly recommend. So yeah, I can't think of a good Afrikaans name that starts with an M. Mardus or something like that. Like, gotta go for something unique. Cool. So then the other thing is as well, so you did mention that workbook on Imposter Syndrome. Any other like really good links or material or something that people can have a look at?
One I haven't finished reading, but definitely would recommend so far is many of you might have heard of the author Brené Brown. She's quite well known. She talks about shame a lot. And she wrote a book called The Gifts of Imperfection. And I would say it's pretty spot on as far as the whole topic of imposter syndrome goes. Like, very good read. I mean, it's the research and stuff and her own revelations are amazing. Definitely check that out.
Okay, awesome. Cool. So I'm tempting fate here. My load shedding was supposed to start 2 minutes ago, so I won't maybe push my luck any further. Thanks so much, Gideon. Like, this was amazing as always. And yeah, thanks for taking the time. And like, hopefully we can have a similar discussion again at some point soon. All right.
Yeah.
Cool.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone that joined. Okay. Cheers everyone.
Keep up. Bye-bye.
Bye.